at cnbcasia.com. CNBC Podcast. CNBC. Fun.
Get your beauty sleep in the biggest flatbed in business class.
Good morning. How are you? Great to see you. Lovely to see you again.
ジェフリー・アーチャー。彼は1940年ロンドンに生まれ、名門オックスフォード大学を出た後、1969年に29歳という若さで保守党議員となる。その後、投資事業の失敗から全財産を失い、一時政界から身を引くことになる。しかし、その体験を元に書いた小説「100万ドルを取り返せ」がベストセラーとなり、作家として世界的な名声を得ることになった。その後、政界復帰も果たし、鉄の女と呼ばれた名宰相サッチャー政権時にはイギリスの政治改革に大きな役割も果たした。
Jeffrey, good morning.
Good morning.
You always tell me that you are not a writer, but you are a storyteller. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, writers are usually well-educated people who have a great command of language. And they write books that are often erudite and well-read by clever people. And you can be a good writer of mathematics. You can be a good writer of English. You can be a good writer of science. So when you take on the novel, you can be praised for being a good writer. But that does not mean you can tell a story. They're two totally different worlds. You must be able to make the person turn the page, make them want to find out what is happening in the next chapter, make them stay there because they want to get to the end. That, it's very helpful if you're a good writer, but it's got nothing to do. That's called storytelling, and that's a God-given gift.
You say Charles Dickens is the greatest storyteller in history?
Well, he's that wonderful combination. He's a great writer and a great storyteller. Those wonderful books that you'll have all read in your country, like Oliver Twist and Great Expectations and Bleak House, they're too long. If he was alive today, if Dickens was born in Japan and was alive today, he'd be telling stories that were 250 pages long. He'd be writing scripts for television. He'd be writing film scripts because he's so clever that he would adapt to whichever age he'd been born in. But the gift he had is that of storytelling. Now that gift has been extended to other fields. For example, music, and for example, films. I mean, it is arguably that you would describe Steven Spielberg as a great storyteller.
Okay, Jeffrey, let's talk about your life. Your life has had many ups and downs. And your most recent and unfortunate experience was 2 years in jail. Now, while you were in jail, what were you thinking? And were you thinking about the future? Were you thinking about your past and your family? And what went through in your mind?
Well, an immense amount of the time was occupied with writing, because I wrote 3 prison diaries. I wrote 1 million words in 2 years. And I also wrote a film screenplay, which is being taken up now. And I'll talk to you about that in a moment. So I sat there and observed everyone and wrote about them. I found that fascinating. And of course, it added greatly to my knowledge of human beings. And in the book I talked to you about earlier, A Prisoner of Birth, which I'm going away to write this month, I have stolen from there an immense amount of ideas and stories. Because the opening of A Prisoner of Birth is of a man up for trial for murder, a murder he hasn't done. And when you get to the end of the first section of the book, you are not sure how the jury will go because there's conflicting evidence. And they put him in prison for 22 years. He's convicted of a crime he didn't do, and he goes to prison for 22 years. And the story is how he gets out and how he gains revenge on the 4 people who put him in.
Interesting.
Now, I am able to use all the knowledge of how prison works and all of that side, which I could never have done.
No.
Now, if you take the book that's A False Impression is just coming out in this country. Of course, I wrote that after I came out of prison, but I've subsequently written, and you will be getting it in about a year's time, a set of short stories called Cat of Nine Tails. And 9 of the stories are little prison stories that people told me when I was in prison. So I've been able to put 9 stories, which I would never have got, into this book. So the answer to your question is, it was a terrible experience, and in some ways a terrible waste of time. But I tried to get out of it all that I could by writing 1 million words and by being involved. And I think probably know a lot more about human beings, a lot more about the problems they face, and I certainly, because I never smoke and I don't drink very much, I didn't know anything about drugs. I now know a lot about drugs and the problems people face. I know a lot about backgrounds of people and the problems they have. So in the end, I think as a writer, one came out with a great deal of new knowledge and new attitude.
New attitude, by that you mean you have more understanding on people.
Well, a child sat on the end of bed talked to me just as he was leaving, and he said, "I'll swap places with you." And I said, "What do you mean? You're 24 years old." He was a heroin addict. He said, "My parents, I don't know where they are. I have no family. I leave prison with 45 pounds. I'm on heroin. I don't know how long I'll live. You, 60 years old, you go back to your wife, your family, your beautiful home, the lifestyle you have. I'd rather have 20 years of that than what I'm going through." He's 24 years old, this boy. He died 3 years later.
Oh my God.
Overdose, found under a hedge in Boston. So yes, the answer to your question is, I saw a world I'd never touched, I'd never seen, I'd never understood. And it was fascinating at one level, and awful, terrible at another.
It was only you who could have written 1 million words in the prison and make the most of it, most of the time, which otherwise other people would be lamenting, sort of deploring, every day. And what kind of advice would you give to normal people, say in Japan, who are in the bad shape right now, at the bottom of their life right now, how to deal with it, how to climb up again?
Well, I had a much worse period than jail. Mary once said that when we were facing bankruptcy, when I was 34 years old, 30 years ago, that was much worse.
How was it?
So when you tell people in Japan, I mean, there'll be people going through that. That's a much worse experience. If you're financially secure and you're physically fit, you can face almost anything, especially if you know it's going to end in 2 years. It's not as if it's the rest of your life. But for someone who's facing bankruptcy or has cancer or has a major family problem, that's far worse. And I would say to them, you've got to go through it. When I was facing bankruptcy at the age of 34, it took me 7 years to come out. You must realize that it won't happen overnight. It won't just go away. And you have to grit your teeth and fight the longer game. When you come out the other end, you will be stronger. You will be more ready to face problems you have. And this takes tremendous energy and dedication. Now, the Japanese have tremendous energy and dedication.
Was that when you decided to write your first book?
Not a penny more, not a penny less.
And that was after you have lost $1 million?
Yes, which in those days was 1974 was a lot of money.
I know.
A lot of money.
But you were the English, the youngest.
I was one of the youngest members of Parliament, and I was looking forward to a long career.
That's right.
And lost everything in a foolish share investment deal with a Canadian company. And they stole my money, and they stole several other people's money, and I was facing bankruptcy and wrote the first book, Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less. And the Japanese bought 1 million copies.
Yeah,
God bless them.
So you recovered your $1 million.
Very quickly, very quickly.
That's incredible. So
when I say very quickly, looking back on it, it was 7 years. Not very quickly, no. 7 years. It seems very quick now, but it was 7 years.
If you didn't have this bankruptcy situation, wouldn't you have written your first book?
No, I would never have written a book at all. I would have become Minister for Pensions and died a boring death. It makes me wonder if Proust is right when he says we all end up doing the thing we're second best at. Because I wonder how many people, Shu, have another talent they never find out about. Yes. Because the answer to your question is, and a very perceptive question, I don't think I'd have written a word. I don't think I'd have ever written a novel if I'd remained in the House of Commons.
That's really strange, you know? And that means unless you had this terrible bankruptcy situation, we would not be reading Cain and Abel. Correct. And False Impression.
Correct. But if you look at many lives, you'll see that they twist off in another direction because of a set of circumstances which people didn't expect. Every one of us, every day of our life, when we leave our front door, everything can change. If you take the number 10 bus instead of the number 11, everything can change. You must adapt to it and go with it.
「高まる女性の投資マインド」今女性の求めるものは始めてみようかなと思っている方からもっとスキルアップしたい方まで欲しい情報楽しい話題が満載陽一さと子の経済塾カフェ小泉ナマズお楽しみください。
你好，这里是中国股市速递。我们为您传送最新的股市信息，邀请专家详细讲解中国经济的高速发展和金融市场纵横，详细介绍上海、深圳、香港3地市場最新動態。
中国株式フラッシュはご覧の時間で放送中です。
ジェフリーの作